Humans are social by nature. We have a biological need to feel connected to other people, to feel that we belong, to feel understood, recognized, and affirmed. This fundamental human need stems from our survival instinct. The propagation and protection of the human species has depended on the strength of our relationships. Matthew Lieberman, author of the book Social: Why Our Brains Are Wired to Connect, explains that anytime we're not engaged in an active task, our brains fall into a default mode. And this way of thinking looks almost identical to our brain activity when it engages in social thinking, or trying to understand other people's thoughts, feelings, and goals. So our brain is wired to be social. It evolved to spend its spare time preparing us for our next social encounter. Our relationships with other people are at the heart of thriving, contributing to our health and our happiness. Let's look at the benefits of social connections, and then we'll discuss what leaders can do to create environments that foster positive relationships. Numerous studies have found links between social connections and well-being. In one study, Ed Diener and Martin Seligman found that the only difference between the top 10% of the happiest people and everyone else was the strength of their relationships. Diener conducted another study with his son, Robert Biswas Diener, looking at the happiness levels of homeless people in the United States and prostitutes in Calcutta, India. The people in the U.S. had greater access to food, shelter, and health care, yet the prostitutes in India were happier. And they concluded that the difference in happiness was due to the strength of people's social connections. The prostitutes had regular contact with their family members, whereas the homeless had few close social ties. A Harvard study that tracked nearly 300 men over 75 years concluded that having meaningful relationships was the most important factor for a good life. Men who had money, health, and good careers were not happy unless they also had strong, positive relationships. In addition to having close relationships, our well-being also depends on the interactions we have with others throughout the day. In her book, Love 2.0, Barbara Fredrickson describes the impact of social connections on our happiness and our health. She explains how we experience a positivity resonance when we share a positive exchange with someone, like a laugh or a smile. These micro moments of connection can occur between loved ones, friends, coworkers, or even two strangers standing together in the grocery line. These exchanges make us feel good, and they cause our brains to release oxytocin, which is a hormone that protects our heart against the dangers of stress. Another way to understand the importance of relationships for thriving is to consider the impact a lack of social connection has on our well-being. Many studies have looked at the negative consequences of loneliness and social isolation. Researchers at Brigham Young University combined the findings from 148 different studies to determine the impact of loneliness and social isolation on mortality. The results showed that people with strong social ties have a 50% lower risk of dying than solitary people. Loneliness had twice the impact on early death as obesity. When John Cacioppo and William Patrick wrote about social isolation in their book Loneliness, they showed that extreme loneliness increases an adult's chance of premature death by 14%. Feeling isolated from others can disrupt sleep, elevate blood pressure, increase the stress hormone cortisol in our bodies, lower our immune functioning, and increase depression. Matthew Lieberman and his wife Naomi conducted a study that revealed the pain that social loss and rejection can cause. They put people in a brain scanner and had them play a video game where they tossed a ball around to other people who they thought were also participating in the study. Actually, they were just pre-programmed avatars. Now, at some point, the avatars cut the person out of the game and tossed the ball to each other. The participants experienced distress when this happened because they felt rejected. But the really interesting part of the study was how their brains processed social rejection. The more rejected the person felt, the more activity there was in the part of the brain that processes physical pain. Our brain responds to social rejection in the same way it responds to a broken arm. Unfortunately, feelings of being socially isolated are rising dramatically. 1 in 3 Americans 45 years or older say that they're lonely. A 1985 survey asked respondents how many people they had discussed important matters with over the last 6 months. And the most common answer was 3. When the survey was repeated in 2004, that number had dropped to 0. So it's clear that having close relationships and high-quality connections with others is one of the most important factors for our well-being. But positive relationships also have a significant impact on performance at work. People who report having a best friend at work are 7 times more likely to be engaged in their jobs as those who don't. According to an MIT study, small increases in social cohesiveness among colleagues led to large improvements in productivity. Researchers gave employees high-tech identity badges that captured their movements and interactions. And they combined information from the badges with data on productivity. Results showed that the more people employees knew in the office and the more they interacted with them, the more productive they were. An analysis that combined the results of dozens of different studies concluded that having positive workplace relationships boosts job satisfaction, increases collaboration and innovation, and increases the energy that people have for persisting at tasks, all of which contribute to better performance. A study of 60 work teams in a large American financial services company found that of all the elements that mattered to a team's success, the most important was how the members felt about each other. Another study at Yale found that what predicted the success of work teams was not their collective IQ or the number of years of experience. It was only their degree of social cohesion. Our research also shows the negative impact of loneliness on performance at work. One study of over 700 employees and supervisors found that greater employee loneliness led to poor performance. Another study showed that loneliness at work negatively impacted organizational commitment. Unfortunately, many people experience loneliness at work, feeling a lack of close relationships or rejection by others. One study found that up to 53% of people feel intensely lonely outside of their private lives. Gallup has asked over 15 million employees if they have a best friend at work. Only 30% said yes. The former U.S. Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, wrote in a Harvard Business Review article that loneliness is a growing health epidemic. He believes the workplace is contributing to this epidemic. We spend more waking hours with our coworkers than with our families. But often we don't feel a personal connection with them. We spend the day staring at our computers or attending task-focused meetings, leaving no time to really get to know one another as a person. So what can leaders do to help employees cultivate positive relationships with their colleagues? Let's look first at friendships and then address ways of fostering high-quality social connections among all employees. Now, many companies discourage on-the-job friendships, but that's a big mistake. If you ask people the key to their success, they often mention a person who believed in them or supported them. Friends help us out when we face problems. They're the cheerleaders who root for us during challenges and celebrate our victories. When he was at Gallup, Tom Rath studied the influence of friendships at work and found that people who reported having a best friend at work were significantly more likely to engage their customers, get more done in less time, innovate, share ideas, have fun on the job, and have fewer workplace accidents. You can help your employees to thrive by encouraging them to build close relationships with their colleagues. Now, this doesn't mean that everyone in the office has to be best friends. Rath found that people who had at least 3 close friends at work were 96% more likely to be extremely satisfied with their lives. And employees who had close friendships with their managers were 2.5 times more likely to be satisfied with their jobs. So what can you do? Well, Gallup found that leaders who regularly discuss friendships triple the chances of employees having a best friend at work. So a good place to start is to talk about developing friendships at work. Encouraging closer, more personal relationships among coworkers can increase the likelihood that people become friends. We can develop close ties with people when we get to know them better. Authentic social connections are built when people feel understood and accepted for who they really are. Lead by example, asking a colleague what she did last weekend, or sharing personal stories so that people get to know you better. Start meetings with everyone sharing a family tradition or a recent vacation. Create opportunities for people to form closer relationships. Organize social events, outings with families, games of kickball, or potluck meals where everyone brings their favorite dish. Have a buddy system to help new employees meet people. When he was the U.S. Surgeon General, Murthy took 5 minutes during weekly staff meetings to let members share something personal about themselves through pictures. People became much more enthusiastic about participating in the meetings, and they felt more valued and connected to their colleagues. The more we learn about people, the more likely we are to find things we have in common, which increases feelings of closeness and affection. In addition to having a few close friends at work, high-quality connections are also necessary for people to thrive. Every interaction with a person at work has the potential to positively or negatively impact our day. Negative interactions can create a toxic work environment that damages employee well-being and performance. Jane Dutton is a professor at the University of Michigan who studies high-quality connections at work. Her research shows that positive experiences with our colleagues impact our well-being. Positive interactions at work give people a sense of belonging and make them feel valued. Employees who report small moments of connection throughout their workday feel more energized and engaged. Leaders need to build workplace cultures where everyone experiences positive interactions on a daily basis. There are a number of important elements that contribute to high-quality connections. These include appreciation, trust, psychological safety, and civility. Let's look at each one of these in more detail. Appreciation is one of the strongest human needs. When Oprah Winfrey gave the commencement address at Harvard in May 2013, she mentioned that almost everyone she has ever interviewed has asked her when the interview was over, "How did I do? Was that okay?" We all have a need to feel valued. Our sense of self-worth is impacted by how others treat us. Appreciation can have a profound effect in the business environment. Consider this. Dan Ariely, a researcher at Duke University, conducted a study that showed that the less we feel appreciated for our work, the more money we want to do it. He offered students money to perform a task that required them to find pairs of identical letters on a piece of paper. When they turned in the completed task, for one group of students, the experimenter asked them to put their name on the paper, looked it over, and then placed it in a pile. For the second group, the experimenter put the paper in the pile without looking at it and with no name. For a third group, the experimenter took the paper and immediately shredded it. The students whose work was shredded needed twice as much money to perform the task again as those whose work was acknowledged. And the students in the second group, whose work was saved but ignored, needed almost as much money to continue as the students whose work was shredded. A study by the American Psychological Association compared employees who reported feeling valued at work with those who didn't feel valued. 96% of the employees who felt valued were satisfied with their job, versus 29% who didn't feel valued. 94% were motivated to do their best work, versus 47%. 89% would recommend their company as a good place to work, versus 16% who didn't feel valued. And 85% were satisfied with their company's recognition practices, versus 16%. So it's clear that appreciation can go a long way in improving engagement, productivity, and happiness among employees. The good news is that showing appreciation is easy. The bad news is that we don't do it often enough, not nearly. About half of Americans say that they've gone an entire year without receiving recognition for good work. Maybe we assume they know. Or we're too busy to stop and express our thanks. Or we think it's their job, so why should we thank them? Whatever the reason, the importance of showing appreciation at work cannot be overemphasized. One of the #1 reasons people leave their jobs is because they don't feel appreciated. Now, there are many ways you can show appreciation. Say thank you. Acknowledge people when you walk past them. Make eye contact, smile, say hello. Call people by their names. Learn as much as you can about your employees. Ask them about their families, their hobbies. As I mentioned earlier, looking for things you have in common will help you to genuinely appreciate them. Maybe you live in the same neighborhood, cheer for the same sports team, or enjoy the same music or food. And notice that I said this will help you appreciate them. Appreciation is not just about acknowledging someone's work. It's about acknowledging their worth as a human being. Show people you value their opinions by asking them what they think. Praise people often. Congratulate them for a job well done. Let them know that they're valued members of the organization. I'll give you an example that may be a tough act to follow. Doug Conant is a former CEO of Campbell Soup Company. He famously wrote more than 30,000 individual notes of thanks to his employees. He also believed in the power of using small, daily interactions in the hallway or the cafeteria to show employees they mattered. Perhaps the thank you notes are too much to take on right now, but those small, positive interactions take almost no time and can create a sizable impact. Recognition for bigger contributions is also important. Find ways to celebrate product innovation or cost reduction or extraordinary sales. Recognize people who've been with the company for a certain number of years. And celebrate the lifelong contributions of employees when they retire. Being recognized by others signals that we belong, which we've seen as a basic need that stems from our survival instinct. It's so strong that it can impact our health and even our longevity. Studies show that Oscar recipients live an average of 4 years longer than other successful actors. And similar results have been found for Baseball Hall of Famers and Nobel Prize-winning scientists. The example of appreciation that you set as a leader is powerful. But you also need to foster an environment where everyone shows appreciation. In her book, Mastering Civility, Christine Porath gives an example of a healthcare organization that created a formal policy called the 10-5 Way. The policy called for employees to make eye contact and smile if they were within 10 feet of someone, and to say hello if they were within 5 feet. The company claims that civility and patient satisfaction both increased as a result of the policy. There are also many social media platforms that allow employees to express gratitude or appreciation to one another online. Now here's another idea. Motley Fool is a company that helps people make better investment decisions. The CEO was convinced that relationships would be stronger if people knew one another by name. So one year he decided that in order for people to get the 20% annual bonus, everyone in the company had to learn the names of all employees, about 250 people. Now don't worry, they did it. Now that might seem a bit extreme, but what could you do to encourage your employees to appreciate each other more? Now let's move on to trust, another critical element of high-quality connections. It's important for our well-being because it helps us to feel safe, and it also impacts performance. A study of almost 200 employees in a financial services company found that those who trusted their leaders more experienced higher levels of psychological safety, and that both trust and psychological safety were positively related to team performance. The American Psychological Association study that I referred to earlier also compared employees who trusted their employer with those who didn't. Results showed that 91% of employees who trusted their employer were satisfied with their jobs versus 53% who didn't trust their employer. The percentage motivated to do their best work was 88% versus 66%. Those who would recommend their company as a good place to work was 46% versus 8%. 23% of the employees who trusted their employer experienced chronic work stress versus 70%. And 9% reported cynicism and negativity versus 57%. 16% wanted to quit versus 65%. So what does trust in a workplace setting mean? We perceive people to be trustworthy when they act with integrity, dependability, and benevolence. People with integrity are honest and truthful. People who are dependable are responsible and consistent in their behavior, so we can count on them to do what they say they'll do. People who are benevolent act kindly to others. We trust them because we know they care about us, which gives us a sense of security. So this means that leaders need to be honest, consistent in their behavior, and show they care about others. Author Simon Sinek believes the #1 job of leaders is to make people feel safe. That's surprising, isn't it? In his TED Talk on the subject, he explains that when people feel safe and protected by their leader, their natural reaction is to trust. So what are some strategies for being a trustworthy leader? For starters, be open, authentic, and vulnerable. Vulnerability can be especially hard for people in positions of authority, but leaders who reveal their shortcomings build trust and respect among their colleagues. When you admit your failures and are open about your limitations, people can relate to you. This sense of authenticity creates a connection that boosts engagement and lifts performance. High-quality connections are also built by showing your employees that you trust them. One of the very best ways to do this is to give people autonomy. By allowing employees to make important decisions and giving them control over how, when, and where they work, you demonstrate your trust in them, and in turn inspires their trust in you. We'll get much more into the additional benefits of autonomy in a future lesson, so stay tuned. You can also show your trust in others by sharing valuable information. Sharing information regarding profits, costs, customers, or strategy with employees sends a clear signal that you trust them with sensitive information. And it turns out that entrusting people with certain knowledge increases the likelihood that they act responsibly with that information. When you share more complete information with people, it gives them a sense of ownership. They will better understand the issues the company is facing and how their behavior impacts the organization. It can make it easier for them to see ways that they could help. Ken Blanchard has run an international management training and consulting firm for decades. His company lost $1.5 million in the first month after September 11, 2001. In order to survive, they needed to cut about $350,000 a month in expenses. He called everyone in the company to a meeting where he opened the books to show them exactly how much money they were losing and from where. People immediately started looking for ways to minimize expenses and maximize income. In just a few years, they turned things around and achieved the highest sales in the company's history. We've established appreciation and trust as critical components of strong workplace relationships. Another important condition for high-quality connections is psychological safety. So how is psychological safety different from trust? Well, it's similar, but it's defined at a group rather than an individual level. Amy Edmondson, a professor at Harvard Business School, has been doing research on psychological safety for years. It's a shared belief that it's safe for employees to take risks at work. In psychologically safe teams, people feel accepted for who they are, and they don't fear negative consequences for expressing their opinions or making mistakes. As a graduate student, Edmondson was studying the performance of medical teams working in hospitals. Now, she expected to find that the teams rated as having the best overall performance would make the fewest medication errors, but she actually found the exact opposite. And she finally realized that the top-performing teams weren't making more errors, but they were admitting to the errors. A sense of psychological safety led to a climate of openness where people felt safe discussing their mistakes. Our need for acceptance means that we're all reluctant to do something that might negatively influence how others perceive us. Self-protection is natural. But refraining from asking questions in order to hide the fact that you don't know something can be detrimental to performance. Imagine a nurse working on a medical team in a psychologically unsafe environment. She may not mention that she believes a patient is being given a dangerously high dosage of medication because she worries that the doctor will question her competence, like he has in the past. The safer people feel at work, the more likely they are to ask questions and admit mistakes. When people don't have to worry about feeling insecure or embarrassed, they can focus their attention on solving problems rather than on self-protection. Many studies have confirmed that psychological safety facilitates learning and performance in organizations. A study of 33 companies in Israel showed that psychological safety was positively associated with learning from failure. Another study of 47 German companies found that psychological safety was related to higher levels of innovation, which positively correlated with firm performance. How can you, as a leader, create a psychologically safe climate? There are a number of things that you can do to help people feel safe about speaking up. You can start by framing work as a learning process. Discuss how the level of uncertainty we face today requires everyone's input. Admit that you don't know everything, and reinforce that by asking a lot of questions. Demonstrating that you don't have all the answers will encourage others to share their ideas. And as hard as it might be, try to show appreciation when your views are challenged. Model the openness and respect that you want to encourage in others. Google believes psychological safety is far and away the most important factor for team success. Paul Santagata is the head of industry at Google. And one of his suggestions for building psychological safety is emphasizing collaboration over competition by always asking how a team can work together to achieve a desired goal. Another recommendation is to replace blame with curiosity. If a problem needs to be addressed, engage people by asking them to explore possible factors that might be causing the issue and help them to look for solutions. Santagata also directly asks his team members how safe they feel taking risks. What would your team say if you asked them if they're worried about negative consequences if they make a mistake? Finally, there's one more absolutely critical factor upon which relationships are based: civility, treating people with dignity and respect. People cannot thrive in an environment where they're belittled or treated rudely. But unfortunately, incivility at work is getting much worse. Georgetown professor Christine Porath has been studying incivility in the workplace for over 20 years, looking at the impact of behaviors like sarcasm, condescending remarks, contempt, or ignoring someone. In 1998, Porath and her colleague Christine Pearson, with whom I worked at the Thunderbird School of Global Management, found that 25% of the people they surveyed were treated rudely at work at least once a week. And when Porath repeated the study in 2011, that number had risen to over 50%. And in 2016, it was 62%. Some of the reasons for increased incivility include stress and overload, technology, and feelings of isolation. Whatever the reason, incivility hurts our well-being and our performance. In one study, researchers had someone be rude to half of the participants by reprimanding them on the way to the experiment. Those who experienced the incivility performed 61% worse on an anagram task and produced fewer than half the number of ideas in a brainstorming task compared to those who hadn't been treated rudely. Now, they also found that simply witnessing incivility reduced performance on the anagrams by 20% and led to 30% fewer ideas when brainstorming. Now, how is it that incivility can have such a strong impact on performance? Experiencing rude behaviors disrupts our attention, which causes us to miss information and impairs our ability to make decisions. One study asked 4,500 doctors and nurses how much disruptive behavior they witnessed at their hospitals. Disruptive behavior was defined as abusive personal conduct, including insulting, condescending, or rude behavior. 77% of the respondents reported witnessing disruptive behavior in physicians, and 65% witnessed disruptive behavior in nurses. But what's really alarming is that the doctors and nurses blamed 71% of their medical errors and 27% of patient deaths on these disruptive behaviors. In addition to distracting us and making us more susceptible to error, incivility can impact performance by making us just not want to put in the effort. In a large national survey of managers and employees, these were some of the reported negative consequences of incivility. 48% of the respondents intentionally decreased work effort. 47% intentionally decreased time at work. 38% intentionally decreased work quality. And of course, there's the emotional cost as well. In the same survey, 80% lost work time worrying about the incident, and 63% lost work time avoiding the offender. Today more than ever, it takes work to create an environment where everyone treats each other with dignity and respect. As a leader, showing respect to others will bring out the best in your people. Employees who feel respected by their leaders report 92% greater focus, 89% higher job satisfaction, and 56% better health and well-being. Start by setting clear expectations for civility and holding everyone accountable. Explain to new employees during their orientation that your company expects people to treat each other with respect. Include respect or civility as one of the company values, and post these values so that people will be reminded daily of the expectations. Have open discussions with your team about the importance of civility. Give feedback to each other about specific things people could do to treat others better. Recognize and reward examples of civility. Include behaviors like collaborating and helping in performance evaluations. Come up with some kind of an award that employees can give their colleagues to recognize positive behaviors. Use collective rewards so that team members have incentives to work together and help each other out. Share stories to make heroes out of people who saved the day by helping others. Any incidents of incivility should be dealt with quickly. If an employee behaves in a disrespectful way, don't let it slide, even if the culprit is a top performer. The collateral damage is too costly to ignore. Hold that person accountable by immediately addressing the incident and identifying steps to improve future behavior. Sometimes a little coaching can go a long way. Positive relationships at work are critical for employee well-being and success. In order to thrive, people need to experience high-quality connections. Leaders can foster these connections by creating an environment that's civil, where employees feel safe, trusted, and appreciated. Great leaders understand that civility is the foundation upon which positive workplaces are built. They're also aware that friendships at work help people to thrive by providing them with support and a sense of belonging.